Quick reminder before we get started on this episode. This podcast is based on my personal experiences and isn't medical advice. You're in the grocery store, you check the ingredients on a product, everything looks safe, then you see it. May contain wheat, or may contain traces of wheat, or manufactured in a facility that also processes wheat. Suddenly what seemed simple isn't so simple anymore. Should you eat it? Put it back? Does it actually contain gluten? Or is the company just trying to protect itself legally? In today's episode, we're talking about what these labels actually mean, what they don't mean, and how I personally decide what goes into my cart. Because by the end of this episode, I want you to have a practical framework instead of feeling overwhelmed every time you see one of these warnings. Let's dive in. Welcome to the Gluten-Free Engineer podcast. I'm your host, Carrie Saunders. In 2011, I was diagnosed with celiac disease, a moment that changed everything. But I was determined not to let it hold me back. With my 2 engineering degrees, I set out to reverse engineer the gluten-free lifestyle, breaking down recipes, safety tips, travel hacks, and everything in between to rebuild a life I love. Whether you have celiac disease, gluten intolerance, or simply choose to live gluten-free, this podcast is for you. Join me each week as we simplify the gluten-free lifestyle, make it fun, and prove that you don't have to miss out on anything. Welcome back to the show. Today we're talking about the dreaded labels on food packaging and what those may contain wheat style messages mean and how we can determine whether we can eat the item. Because it is one of the most confusing parts of gluten-free living. When you need to be gluten-free, you usually have found out that you need to avoid wheat, barley, and rye. And then there's, a number of other ones that are still a derivative of those, but they're less common, thankfully. But you need to at least avoid those main ones, the wheat, barley, rye, and then oats that aren't certified gluten-free. But what do these labels mean? Because the ingredients is one thing and cross-contamination is another thing, and that's what these labels can infer. So these statements around wheat are there because wheat is a top 8 allergen, and they must say whether it might contain some wheat, at least in the United States and probably most other countries, if it could have some wheat in it. Wheat doesn't necessarily mean it's going to have gluten in it. More than likely, yes, it will likely have gluten in it if it's got wheat, because most of the wheat we use in our products and our food products are made from the grain part of the wheat, not the grass part, which doesn't have gluten in it. And you never know if that's going to get cross-contaminated anyway. So avoiding all wheat is very, very important, especially if you're celiac and if you're highly sensitive. It's just generally a good idea. So let's talk about what each one means. So the may contain wheat does have a potential cross-contact concern to it. Also, the one that says manufactured on shared equipment with wheat. This is even more higher concern potentially because it depends upon the cleaning practices of that manufacturer. How well do they thoroughly clean the lines before they put something gluten-free on it? Say the previous run had wheat on it. Maybe it was Kit Kat bars or something like that. I'm going to pick on the candy industry right now. So maybe it was Kit Kat bars and it had wheat on it. And then they're next going to run Snickers, which doesn't have wheat in it. But if they don't clean the lines appropriately, some of those Snicker bars could have traces of the wheat from the previous run of Kit Kat bars, for example. So that means that it's on shared equipment and it has a potentially higher concern for cross-contamination because you don't know whether your Snickers bar was right after the runs of the Kit Kat bar. So you don't know how high of a risk you have for getting wheat in you. And then next is the made in a facility that also processes wheat. This one's all over the place as far as how big of a risk it is. I always avoid it in my experience. Whenever I've seen this on the label, I've gotten sick. So back when I was early being gluten-free and didn't realize how sensitive I was, I ate these one prepackaged cookies. They said they were gluten-free. And every time I ate them, I didn't feel quite right. And so I started, as my engineering brain does, I started investigating and trying to figure things out. Well, I really scrutinized the label and it said made in a facility that also processes wheat. So for that manufacturer, that product, I knew I could not eat those products because I was getting sick from it. Now, the problem here is if you are a celiac who doesn't have obvious symptoms. You don't have digestive symptoms right away. And some celiacs don't have any digestive systems that they can tell. You may not know that you're getting damaged. So if you're celiac, I highly recommend, and you can talk with your doctor and nutritionist to double check, to avoid anything that says may contain wheat, manufactured on shared equipment, made in a facility that also processes wheat. If you're celiac, I just completely avoid it if it says it could have wheat in it. Now, if you are gluten intolerant, that's really up to you and your doctor. That made in facility also processed wheat can be a lower concern simply because the facility could be enormous. Products may never touch the same equipment. You don't know. It's, potentially in the air is what they would like to say, or, just know that it's within the vicinity. So it's kind of a catch-all, legal protect themselves in case some wheat gets into some food products and it causes somebody with an allergy to have a reaction. So in general, it's a great that they do that for us in the community. But I just want you to know, as a celiac, I would highly avoid it. If you're gluten intolerant, again, that's completely up to you and your doctor in it. But that's what that means, is there's something else in the facility that uses wheat to make their product. So these labelings can get really confusing because these labels don't tell us if there's actually any gluten testing, if there's any cleaning procedures, unless they voluntarily put that on there. I have seen some companies who have products that are in the same facility, but they talk about cleaning the lines and testing their equipment. So they talk about that separately. But these types of label doesn't mean whether they're going to be cleaning the lines, what your risk level is, how many parts per million is there potentially gluten in these products. So two products can have the same exact warning label, but have very different risks. That's what I want you to really get out of this episode, is you just don't know with these warning labels. So for me personally, since I'm celiac, I always make sure it is certified gluten-free if it's a prepackaged food item. Almost always, unless there's a brand that I know and that I trust and that has a reputation for being very careful. So if you see a certified gluten-free item that says made in a facility that also processes wheat, you can be pretty rest assured that that product is not going to have gluten in it above the legal limits for your country. So what that means is you shouldn't get sick from it. It should be completely safe from it for you. And they have tested to make sure that the lines of products coming out are safe and don't have, enough gluten in them to fail their test, their certified gluten-free test. Now, I'll also go for gluten-free labeled products where they say gluten-free, but it's not the certified label, as long as they don't have the other warnings. If they have the other warnings, then for me being a celiac, it's a no-go for me. And then if something says may contain wheat, that's an absolutely no-go for me. I do not even get near it. Barley is worse for me of the three grains than wheat, but it's still wheat. I'm not even going to risk it for that item. So I always look for certified gluten-free. Then I'll next look for gluten-free labeled food products, especially if they don't have the other warnings that we're talking about. And then that may contain wheat. I just completely, it's off the limits for me. So if you want to keep your grocery shopping really simple and, minimize how much you're making these decisions that we're talking about, I want to encourage you to shop the borders of the grocery store. Most grocery stores, when you go into them, you start with fruits and vegetables. If you go around the back, that's usually animal proteins. And then you continue on, you're going to probably run into dairy. And then on the other end, usually on the opposite side of the fruit and vegetables, you're going to find the frozen food products. So if you're not going down those center aisles, you're going to not be running into foods that are processed, that are man-made basically. And then you're not going to have to worry about gluten. If it's a single ingredient item, you're not going to need to worry about gluten in it. Now, if they add additives or food things like that, then you're going to need to worry about gluten. So, fruits and vegetables do not have gluten in them naturally. Animal products in general do not have gluten in them. Now, there's a little caveat there. I will say that many modern day animals, at least in the United States, are fed lots of grains. So for me personally, my stomach gets upset on grain-fed animal products like beef, chicken, things like that. So I try to get grass-fed beef. It's just better for the environment and better for yourself. And I also try to get naturally fed chickens. They're meant to eat bugs and stuff like that, not grains. So I try to actually work to eat a little bit healthier and better for the environment types of proteins, because I do eat animal products. And I try to be conscious about that for my own stomach as well as for, the environment. That's obviously a completely different debate here. But my point is that if it's a plain single ingredient food in the grocery store, it should not ever have gluten in it. You don't just go to the store and buy wheat, like a stalk of wheat or a stalk of barley. At least I've never seen it in how long I've been alive, or a stalk of rye. It's just not normal to find in a typical grocery store. So it's hard to just go buy gluten without buying a processed food. So then if you do go down those aisles, because sometimes we do need the convenience of processed foods, sometimes bread's very convenient, pasta can be very convenient, things like that can be comforting and convenient. Next, I then want to make sure it's certified gluten-free if you're celiac, says gluten-free if you're not celiac. And then you want to look for those warning labels to make sure there aren't some sort of weird exception to something that doesn't have a gluten ingredient in it, but could have a higher potential of cross-contamination. So I usually avoid anything that says may contain wheat or processed in a facility. I actually avoid all those, but I'm celiac, so I have to be even more careful than those that are gluten intolerant. So I want to encourage you that while these labelings might be a bit confusing, hopefully this episode will help you understand a little bit more about what they truly mean. And you will get better at this the more you do it. So if you're newer to this, don't feel, defeated. Just look for the opportunities to learn and to grow and to help this get easier. The more you build confidence, the easier this is going to get. And when I go to the grocery store now anymore, it's just a normal trip to the grocery store. It's kind of like before figuring out I had a celiac. When it was early on for me going to the grocery store, it was pretty stressful. I mean, I'm not going to lie. It was really stressful and it felt very overwhelming. So I want you to look for all the little golden windows when you're shopping of things you do right and, things you can have, and look for those positives. And then you're going to have a much better outlook on your diagnosis, whether it's celiac or gluten intolerance or some other reason that you need to be gluten-free for some other health reason, and use it to your advantage. And look at it this way too. This is one thing people were like, oh, Carrie, don't you just wish you could have gluten? And I'm like, not really, because it has forced me to eat more whole foods and to eat a better diet naturally than if I hadn't found out, however you want to say it, that I had celiac. And if our family hadn't figured out that pretty much we all have celiac, we now don't go out to eat fast food. We are not eating high processed foods all the time. It's a blessing in disguise that, we are forced to think about what we eat, because most Americans don't think about what they eat, and we're forced to eat more whole foods and more healthy foods that are direct sources of vitamins and minerals and things to fuel our body so we can feel better long term and in the short term too. So I want to encourage you again, confidence doesn't come from knowing every answer. It comes from having a framework you can trust. So hopefully this episode helps to give you a framework and some decisions you can, make on a regular to make this journey much easier for you. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Gluten-Free Engineer. If you found value in this story, please share it with someone who might need encouragement on their own gluten-free journey. For more tips, recipes, resources, and even links to my YouTube channel, head on over to theglutenfreeengineer.com. It's your one-stop hub to make gluten-free living simple, fun, and full of flavor. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on an episode. And we will see you next week. The Gluten-Free Engineer podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. I share my personal experiences and stories about living with celiac disease and navigating a gluten-free lifestyle. This podcast does not provide medical advice. Always consult with a qualified healthcare professional for medical questions, concerns, or advice specific to your health. Before we continue, I'd like to introduce you to a service that I really love, the Dinner Daily. It's a meal planning service that makes gluten-free life so much easier, especially for busy families. Each week, you'll get a meal plan with a grocery list that's customized to your local grocery store sales. helping you save time and money. You can fully tailor your plan to fit needs and select other food sensitivities and food preferences, and you'll still get one simple menu the whole family can enjoy. And right now, you can get 20% off a full year membership at less than $4 a month with code GFE at thedinnerdaily.com. No more what's for dinner stress, just simple family-friendly meals made for the way you eat. Now back to the show.